a briefing. Let's go there now.
Political, economic and humanitarian implications for Ethiopia and the broader region. All parties must recognize a simple truth. There is no military solution. Last week, I issued an appeal for action on 3 fronts. First, calling on all parties to immediately cease hostilities. Second, ensuring a commitment for unrestricted humanitarian access everywhere and fully re-establishing of public services. Third, creating the conditions for the start of an Ethiopian-led political dialogue to find a solution to this crisis. These steps are essential for 2 critical reasons. First, the unity of Ethiopia and the stability of the region are at stake, and they are very important. The military front lines in Tigray have now reached the regions of Amhara and Afar. The declaration of a unilateral ceasefire by the government of Ethiopia on the 28th of June and the withdrawal of the Ethiopian National Defense Forces from Mekelle did not lead to a comprehensive ceasefire. The Tigray region remains largely under a de facto humanitarian blockade and cut off from key public services such as electricity and communications. Tigrayan forces have since expanded their presence into neighboring Amhara and Afar regions, where fighting has escalated. Other actors in Ethiopia have entered the fight through mass mobilization and the activation of regional armed groups. Inflammatory rhetoric and ethnic profiling are tearing apart the social fabric of the country. The wider region is already witnessing the political, economic and social impact of the conflict beyond the borders of Ethiopia. Second, the human price of this war is mounting by the day. A humanitarian catastrophe is unfolding before our eyes. More than 2 million people have been displaced from their homes, and 1 million more are in immediate need of life-saving humanitarian assistance, including food, water, shelter, and health care. At least 400,000 people are living in famine-like conditions. Last month, UNICEF warned that 100,000 children face life-threatening severe acute malnutrition over the next 12 months. Refugee camps have been destroyed. Healthcare systems have been decimated, with hospitals and clinics attacked and looted. And it has all been exacerbated by electricity and communications blackouts. I'm also deeply concerned by reports of horrific sexual and gender-based violence from survivors, including women and children. I condemn these atrocity acts in the strongest possible terms. This is compounded by other serious allegations of human rights violations and abuses against civilians reportedly perpetrated by all parties to the conflict. There must be accountability. A joint investigation by the Office of United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission is concluding. Mr. President, the United Nations and its humanitarian partners have mobilized to reach more than 5 million people with food or other essentials. But the capacity to respond is severely constrained by insecurity, delays, and a host of restrictions on the work of humanitarian organizations. Overland access into Tigray now depends on a single route through the Afar region, which involves passing through numerous checkpoints. Humanitarian organizations require roughly 100 trucks worth of assistance and supplies to reach Mekelle every day. Yes, since mid-July, an average of less than 10 trucks per day have been able to get through, and no trucks have arrived for over a week, while food warehouses are now empty. Sadly, humanitarian workers have been harassed and even killed. Well beyond Tigray, the conflict in Afar and Amhara regions has displaced reportedly 300,000 more people. This is taking place alongside efforts to maintain broader humanitarian support across Ethiopia in response to intercommunal violence, flooding, locust infestation and other challenges. The conflict is also taking a heavy economic toll, illustrating once again the utter folly of war. The fighting has already drained over $1 billion from the country's coffers. Debt is mounting, access to credit is drying up. Inflation is growing higher, and basic food items are running low. Meanwhile, Ethiopia is suffering from the 5th highest incidence of COVID cases on the continent. Mr. President, Excellencies, for all these reasons, I repeat my fundamental call. All parties must immediately end hostilities without preconditions and seize that opportunity to negotiate a lasting ceasefire. Foreign forces should leave the country. Unrestricted humanitarian access to all areas in need must be guaranteed, and humanitarian workers must be respected. Public services must be re-established. I believe there is an opportunity to address the conflict peacefully, which the parties must seize in the interest of Ethiopia. And conditions must be created for the start of an inclusive national political dialogue to address the underlying causes of the conflict and ensure Ethiopian voices direct the pathway to peace. On these issues, I've been in contact with Prime Minister Abiy, and I also have received a letter from the President of the Tigray region, as it was elected at the time, in response to my appeal, which was also addressed to the President of the Security Council on this matter. The UN is ready to work together with the African Union and other key partners to support such a dialogue. In the period ahead, the attention and unity of the Security Council will be critical. Mr. President, allow me to express one final word of profound regret about the tragic events unfolding in Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a country full of promise, driven in large measure by the energy and initiative of its youth. It's heartbreaking to see many young Ethiopians being instrumentalized and mobilized in the war effort. Their energies are being channeled into a path of division and destruction instead of the path of building a better future for all Ethiopians. They will be the ultimate casualties in this needless conflict. In every sense, the future of Ethiopia is at stake. Let us pledge to do all we can to advance the path of national cohesion and peace, and I thank you.
I thank the Secretary General for his briefing. I now give the floor to those Council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of Ireland. You have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'd like to preface my remarks, if I may, by offering my sincere condolences to the victims of the horrific attack today in Kabul. Our sincere condolences to the victims.
All right, so we're going to leave that for the time being. Just to recap a little bit what's going on. So in Afghanistan, we have explosions that took place. 13 people, we believe, have been killed, including 2 U.S. servicemen. But also what's been unfolding for some time now, 9 months actually, as the conflict in Ethiopia. And that's what the UN Secretary General has just been addressing to the Security Council now. But let's cross to our correspondent in New York, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, just to give us a sense of what has been said and what it might all mean. Sherwin, the Secretary General, very concerned about Afghanistan, but he was there to really talk about the situation that seems to be escalating in Ethiopia.
Yeah, and he spoke to the press a week ago, prefacing this meeting in the Security Council, given the urgency. You know, we might be distracted by the latest events happening in Afghanistan. The focus really internationally appears to be on that. But there is a long-standing, over 9-month conflict that is now threatening regional stability in the Horn of Africa region. The UN has now for months been warning of widespread famine conditions that are spreading in the Tigray region. Some 400,000 people are desperate. You heard the Secretary General there talk about the lack of access, the fact that the region requires about 100 trucks laden with food and supplies to enter that region per day, but only about 10 per day were getting through. He talked about the need for all parties to immediately end hostilities without preconditions and to seize that opportunity to negotiate a lasting ceasefire. He talked about the human suffering that is growing, that there is no military solution, Peter. We often hear this, whether you're talking about Afghanistan, whether you're talking about Syria, South Sudan. The UN is very clear that there is never a military solution to intransigence and conflicts. He called for 3 things in the main. Calling on all parties to immediately cease hostilities. Second, ensuring a commitment for unrestricted humanitarian access everywhere, of course, given the famine concerns that are spreading, and creating the conditions, Peter, for the start of an Ethiopian-led political dialogue to find a solution to this crisis, pointing to the fact that unilateral ceasefire announced by Abiy Ahmed, the Ethiopian Prime Minister, of course, coming at a time when the Tigray forces felt they had the upper hand, that there was a resurgence there. Of course, there has been no ceasefire despite that declaration. In fact, a week ago, the Prime Minister calling for the youth in particular in Ethiopia to join the ranks of the Ethiopian Defense Force to defend Ethiopia as the TPLF forces spread from the northern province of Tigray into the Amhara and Afar regions to neighboring provinces to the south en route to the capital Addis Ababa. Clearly, the UN Secretary General appealing now to the UN Security Council to back what he has called for, to back a call for this negotiated process, to back his call for a ceasefire. But I can tell you there are divisions in that Security Council. The likes of China and Russia have articulated positions in the past, Peter, where they say that this is an internal matter for Ethiopia and not a matter for the UN Security Council who's responsible for the maintenance of international peace and security around the world. So the Secretary General unequivocal in his remarks that this is a conflict that will have regional implications. This goes beyond the borders of Ethiopia. The question is, will the Security Council back what the Secretary General is calling for, a ceasefire, humanitarian access, and unimpeded humanitarian access, and of course the beginning of a political process that can really, come over and be overarching in terms of what the parties see on the ground, which is a military solution. Of course, the UN disagrees with that.
Yeah, and he was at great pains to also stress that there have been abuses from both sides, because I think a lot of the language has been Ethiopian authorities are seen as the aggressors and the Tigrayans perhaps defending their position. But he was quite clear to say that some of these abuses that are being seen and need to be brought to account are happening on both sides.
Yeah, not only the internal protagonists, but they were, for a large part of this conflict, you had Eritrean forces backing the Ethiopian government troops, and they too were accused of just the most bizarre and outlandish human rights abuses, Peter. The reports of women being raped, buses being stopped and people being taken off buses and shot. It's going to be very interesting to see what the report, both the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission working with the High Commissioner's Office in Geneva on human rights, what that report is going to reveal. It's going to be a report full of atrocities given the anecdotal evidence we have been getting from the region over a number of months. And the big concern here is that this situation is not going to be arrested in the absence of a clear and unified message from the UN Security Council. Certainly, we heard from members of the Human Rights Watch, the Human Rights International NGO. They said the Security Council has sat on the sidelines while the Ethiopian government has choked off aid to Tigray and the warring parties, and they're now bringing abuses against civilians in the Amhara and Afar regions. These are the southern provinces to Tigray. Meeting in public is a start, but the Security Council needs to take action, such as making a diplomatic trip to the affected regions and imposing sanctions on individual abusers. So it raises the question whether this council, given its dynamics, has the appetite, Peter, to impose sanctions on the protagonists here in the absence of a political negotiated settlement that the UN Secretary General has now been calling for.
Yeah, and some people might say that this negotiated settlement may be really difficult, given, as you've described, initially the Ethiopian authorities went into Tigray in November last year. They gained ground and had said that they'd dealt with the matter. However, things turned, and Mekele went back to the Tigrayans by June. And in fact, we've started to see the Tigrayans expand beyond Tigray, moving further south. And this, of course, is just causing both sides to dig in their heels. But as you say, and as the Secretary General was saying, if urgent action isn't taken, one doesn't know where this will end.
Well, just think about the national position of Ethiopia here. The Secretary General talking about the cost here, the financial cost. Remember, Ethiopia is not exempt from the devastation being wrought by the COVID-19 pandemic. He talked about this having the fifth largest number of cases on the continent, that the coffers of Ethiopia have drained some $1 billion already. And remember, this is not necessarily one of the richest countries in the world, even given its economic gains over the last number of decades. This is a very acute situation in a region that is known to suffer droughts, the impacts of climate change, the fact that you have this pandemic, in addition to the fact that you have a conflict ongoing there. This is a dire economic situation for a country that really doesn't need these kinds of distractions, given the fact that we are, sort of building towards the 2030 agenda and the sustainable development goals here, Peter. This is setting Ethiopia back a very, very long way. And so the implications here, the humanitarian cost, the civilian cost, the financial cost is going to be very, very acute for a country that cannot afford it right now. Just imagine if South Africa, given the economic struggles and unemployment figures that came out, was involved in a protracted conflict of this nature. It would be an economic struggle even for one of the more wealthiest countries on the continent, no less for a country like Ethiopia in a region that is prone to conflicts, but also in a region that is suffering drought and, as the UN has indicated, famine conditions in Tigray. Famine conditions, Peter. That is no joke. And the ramifications that come with that, people are dying because they don't have access to food, because humanitarian convoys laden with food are not being allowed into the Tigray region. There are accusations from Human Rights Watch that the Ethiopian government is seeking to starve the people of Tigray. So the responsibility clearly falling on the shoulders of the UN Security Council. And if history is our guide, sometimes they don't always show up.
Yeah, so right. Sherwin, we'll leave it there for the time being. And I know that you're watching that other story for us now that we have confirmation that at least 2 U.S. servicemen have been killed in these explosions. I'm sure that President Biden probably under pressure now, slightly different to earlier in the week.
Let me update you on those numbers. We are now getting reports from the Pentagon that at least 12 U.S. service members have been injured. So that's an update from the number that you have there. And more than 60 civilians, mostly Afghanis, queuing to access the compound, essentially, that is being run by the U.S. military at the Kabul International Airport. 12 service members plus 60 casualties. That's what we're getting from Afghan authorities. Scenes of carnage. The latest video that I have seen is bloody carnage outside the gates of Kabul airport. I don't think we know the extent to what has happened there. It is nighttime in Kabul right now. And of course, the President Biden, this was a bad week already. The death of these service members will add a great deal of pressure to any timelines that they were seeking in terms of their evacuation from Kabul. Remember, troops are supposed to leave in terms of a deal with the Taliban by August 31st. Does that move that evacuation, the troop withdrawal earlier? Will they be able to extend if that is now needed, given the tens of thousands that are still queuing outside of that airport seeking evacuation through military flights being run by the United States? A very complex situation unfolding, and certainly a situation made more difficult for this president that has already been under severe pressure, given the scenes of chaos that precipitated the twin explosions that we saw at the Abbey Gate at Kabul airport, but also at the Baron Hotel, which was the base for UK British operations in Afghanistan. So a very fluid situation. And of course, the Taliban condemning this attack, pointing the finger at ISIS, an affiliate of ISIS, and of course, the Western nations warning their citizens preemptively of a possible attack today, and of course the 2 twin attacks bearing them out.
All right, Sherwin, we'll leave that for the time being, but as you say, fluid situation, and perhaps we might come back to you for something else that develops there. But thanks very much indeed for that update in the interim.
Thanks, Peter.
All right, that's our correspondent in New York. So, there's numbers increasing. I believe the Pentagon has been briefing the media this afternoon at 3 p.m. US time, which is our time now, actually. And so that update is coming through 13 US servicemen involved in that attack. I'm not sure how many were killed. Earlier, we had 2 deaths for sure, but 13 now could be deaths and those injured, plus the number of civilians as well, in 2 explosions. And these have been blamed on an offshoot of ISIS called ISIS-K. But we'll get more on that as we get more information. At this stage, no one has claimed responsibility. We're going to take a quick break. Stay with us.